everybody. I'm greeting you from absolutely stunning Seal Cove, Maine. I'm at the Alcyon Center, and I am with my friend, Reverend Andy Stinson, who is coming at us from, I'm sure it's lovely, but not as lovely, Fall River, Massachusetts.
Indeed.
We are here for book club number, I don't know what, but we're going to be talking about this rather remarkable book, The Religion of the Apostles, Orthodox Christianity in the First Century by Stephen D. Young. And I should say, Andy turned me on to this, that, because it didn't have any name recognition for me, and I think of myself as someone versed in Orthodoxy, I probably had a little attitude. And then I read the book and I was just surprised by one thing after another. So just for the record, Andy is a minister in a UCC church with
National Association Church, but thank you very much. So,
oh Jesus, sorry, that was bad. Congregational church, and has 2 master's degrees, one in Swedenborgian theology and the other in divinity, and I have a master's degree in theological studies. So we're not, we're fairly versed in this stuff. So that I was so surprised that much really kind of blew me away.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's, I think for, one of the beauties of the book that De Young does so well, who, he's an Orthodox priest, and he is fairly published anyway, but also runs they're part of a podcast called Lord of Spirits, which is really where he's gotten a lot of traction. But the way in which the continuity of connection between the divine of prior to human record to here and now and today is just so, like, it's you can like it, you can disagree with it, you can all that, but it is bulletproof in terms of how its understanding of the continuity of God's work and God's witness and the divine's operation in the world, and how all of the angels and archangels and demons and all are ordered within that. And that's that's a heck of a truth claim in 2021. That's just that alone, to be able to stand in that place and say, oh yeah, from before the beginning of time to, this moment right now, this is how it all works. That's, and which is really what he does in placing it, I think, talking about the religion of the apostles at, the time of the apostles and what they understood and what they didn't understand and all that. And then how that filters into what we know now. It's this just really interesting way of like, okay, it's not now, but it's also not the ancient. So it's a really neat tactic of being able to then see the connected line that goes between the two. And that blew me away. Like, because again, I'm not unversed in this stuff, and I've really, but the way in which it creates this ironclad record of, it's been said about, that the power of the religious life, or the power of religion, or the power of tradition, however you want to frame that, is that it tells us where we are, where we come from, and where we're going. It navigates us in time. It places us in time and space, and so that we can then have the experience of being in time and space. What the religion of the apostles does, it does it better than most anything I've ever read, I think, in some ways.
Oh yeah, it fires the imagination. Like, holy shit, this is happening right now.
Right.
You pick up this book and you think it might be kind of sort of a dry tome about history, and you may even think that about the Orthodox religion, and yet you've put it down and you're like, wow,
right.
I just got replaced in the narrative.
Right.
So he does this thing that, one of the main things in the book is he's saying this is the Second Temple period, that what he's looking at of Judaism and relating it to the apostles. And so that's roughly 515 BC to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And he's doing something kind of right out of the gate saying this Judaism is lives on in Orthodoxy, even as it has been eclipsed by modern rabbinic. I had never really heard that. I mean, I knew that there was a difference between modern rabbinic and back then, but he makes the point that it's rabbinic Judaism is in some sense, a deliberate rejection of the elements that got incorporated into Christianity.
Yes, and I think that's a very, like, I mean, he alludes to this at the beginning of the book. Like, that's a really new truth claim. Like, that's within decades old of the research that's been going on. Is, I mean, I was taught in seminary, and you read the old histories that, that this, Second Temple period, gives birth to Christianity, and that there is this continuous line that happens, and that somehow that the Jewish tradition just continues on in that, but a little different. But he's not making that claim at all. He's saying that actually the rabbinic tradition is a direct and rejection almost of the Second Temple period and all of this that is grounded in it. And that is, I mean, that's mind blowing. Like, that's really because now you're like, everything we thought we knew about, the folks down the street in terms of their worship, and I say the folks down the street because here in Fall River, the synagogue's right up the street. And, everything we thought we knew about that in terms of our relationship and all that, very different. And when he says it, there is this great aha moment for me, who are in the practice of keeping the festivals and Christmas and Easter and all the things that we do, and the celebration of our worship life and worship year here. There is a difference, but I've never been able to articulate kind of how that works. And this is like, and he comes right out of the gate and makes this extraordinary claim, which change, I mean, it really does kind of change everything in a way of what we thought because it places Christianity and the Christian tradition in a different line. It's like having different parents than you thought you had.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also, I'm sure he knows that that it's provocative, but he also cites scholars that essentially agree with this, coming from a variety of backgrounds, not merely Orthodox, but also even Jewish.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the next thing that really blew my mind was, he'll use the term binitarian later in the book, but what he really says is the Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity, is actually an organic evolution out of the Second Temple understanding of God. And he's really coming back and citing scripture again and again, a lot of Isaiah, I believe.
Yep.
Of the angel of the Lord.
Yep. Yeah,
so,
I mean, that again, that is just I mean, I say it's earth shattering. It's not in some ways, but it is but to spend the time on it that he spends on it, to make that as to bring it forward and as explicit as he does, I mean, I'm doing a Bible study here in the book of James, and it almost makes me want to pivot a little bit how I'm coming at that Bible study because of this understanding of, no, they understood there was the movement of the Spirit. I mean, we have that at creation. We understood there is, Jehovah God, Yahweh. They understood there's this Spirit of the the pillar of smoke by day and the pillar of fire by night. They understood these, and then they understood the engagement of the angel of the Lord, whether it's the oaks at Mamre or whether, I mean, there's this way where, like, it's like, and that when he makes his case, and like, well, of course there is, like, I mean, of course there is, I mean, it becomes obvious, but we
were so
right. And the Protestant tradition, right. And the Protestant tradition, it's like, I mean, one of the problems that I've always discovered over years of coming out of the Protestant tradition is that you're always the little brother that's trying to differentiate yourself from the family a little too hard. Like you're always trying to push back against, and so there's this rejection of stuff that you don't need to reject, and there's this pushing on stuff that is, you don't need to push on, but you want to, like, I'm the one who wears the black t-shirts and I'm the bad boy or whatever. You're trying so hard to differentiate yourself that that there's this way in which you lose the richness of the tradition that has been handed you. And I think that's never been brought, like, in all my theological stuff, that was never really brought to the fore. One of the for me, I have a real, like, I have a wonky Christology around this personally. So there's all this kind of questioning around. So I don't know how much I hold up to this, but I do hold up to the fact that there clearly are all of the seeds of the Trinity that would come forward in, out of the great, out of Nicaea and all that was, the entire tradition was pregnant with it. It really was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's it. And so just to bring a little clarity to it, he's saying that this angel of the Lord is both distinct from God and identified with God in that very Trinitarian sense. So
right.
I'm on page 20, where he says, the first explicit reference to the word of the Lord in the scripture comes in Genesis 15:1. The word of Yahweh appeared to Abram in a vision, literally in a seeing in the Hebrew. Abram saw something or someone who told him to not be afraid because I am your shield. Abram understood the figure he encountered to be the Lord Yahweh, and pointed out that he had no heir to inherit the blessings God had given him. The word then responded to Abram's difficulty with the promise of a son. And so you just see this in Kingdoms, in 1 Samuel 3:1, the situation was so dire that the word of Yahweh was rare. People did not see the word of the Lord. So there's this presencing and absencing of this being, the word, depending on fidelity of the
right. And well, you have two things. One, I really appreciate in this, that conversation of that when that there and where he starts that by defining this idea of a body, of homeostasis, which is what they come, later in Nicaea to call the three persons of the Trinity. When you say person, you mean homeostasis. So in this whole definition of bodies that he gives to this, that I think changes a lot of the Trinitarian stuff I encountered, in Protestant land, around, these three separate persons and and all the ways that this gets worked with in the Roman Church, with that, the Protestant Church then becomes the inheritors of, but this Orthodox idea that no, there are just different, and not, again, not to turn into modalism or different forms or different, but there are these expressions, there are these bodies, there are these ways in which the divine takes form and root and being in the world that are truly distinct and yet truly whole and yet truly and so defining that, going right back to the root of this, of the homeostasis kind of idea, that was super helpful for me, because it was like, oh, okay, I get that we're onto something, that, because that, again, like it goes right back to the very beginning of Genesis, right back to the beginning of this this part you read out of there. And the other thing that's related to that is, that second paragraph that you read, where they're talking about that the word of the Lord was rare, as indicated by the lack of visions, and that the way and he does this again and again, the way he really does set up different ages of humanity, in terms of, and this is a big part of my understanding, is that there are different ages, and I think, if we go to like some of our modern apologists, we can see this at work. Like, you read Tolkien, or you read Lewis, or you read some of these guys that, they're kind of hearkening back to a magical age. And it's like, well, no. Like, I mean, or no, rather, yes and no. There was this magical age, and we continue to live in this magical age, and yet we are blind to it, and we've changed our rationality has changed, and our thought has changed, and thus our access to it has changed. That's right. So that we don't see it as such, but they see it in such a way that and so they lived in connection with spirits. They lived in connection with the angelic in ways that they understood. They lived in connection with it. And we like, oh, I had a weird dream last night. Well, tell me what that meant. Yeah. What do you think? Like, we don't frame it like, oh gosh, I must have had an extra burrito or something. Like we frame it in all these, organic ways, or where, as my phrase I like to use is, we're poisoned by rationality. Like, rationality is, too much of anything is great, and we live in an age that's just poisoned by it. That we have so much of it, we can't, it infects and destroys every other system of our being. And so and so they're talking about this 5,000-year-old age, or whatever it is, that you're harkening back to the point where when they finally get around to writing down Genesis, and they're saying, oh yeah, no, they're right there, and that hasn't changed. We've changed in relationship to it.
That's it. So another way of looking at that is there's a explicit spirituality from the get-go, in the sense that these experiences are meant to have these experiences as being made in the image of God. However, whether or not you have these experiences is a function of something you're doing or not doing.
Right. And
that's really, really quite wild. So another thing that he's very adamant about, and you see, before I read this book, I would have interpreted this almost in a really Greek kind of way. But he says Yahweh has no need of anything that we have,
right,
or anything that we can do. So this is not like a pagan deity who is sort of implied lack in the deity that requires our sacrifice.
Right. And is trying to imitate something that the pagan deity is trying to imitate. Is doing what they're doing, is trying to gain the influence that they're gaining, because they're kind of imitating Yahweh God. They're trying to get the children of earth to worship them versus to worship Yahweh. That it's not even that Yahweh has all the stuff, and they're just trying to steal some of the stuff they're trying to imitate what is going on. It's even deeper than that. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, that is. I was thinking where I was going with it was stunning for me when he was saying, therefore the sacrifice in the Second Temple period was to actually make the human worthy to be in the presence of the deity.
Right.
That was really just stunning to me.
Right.
That you do not want to be in the presence of this thing if you are not
right,
cleansed and prepared.
Right. Exactly.
And that speaks very much to, we're at a point where I had wild dreams because I ate too much. We're not even
right.
We're not. First of all, they're not spiritual visions. They're the result of biology. They may be
right.
weird, but we're also making no correlation as to why this person has them and that person doesn't.
Right.
In fact, we may even pathologize a person who's happy.
Yep, absolutely. And how, and what you get out of the gate from, you just interpret out of the gate, and they say, and he says, numerous times, how dangerous that is in this world. How dangerous it is to be dealing with these principalities, to be dealing with these spirits, to be encountering these other entities that have, that know and want things from you, and that are engaged in this, in your, it's the old phrase, you might not care about politics, but politics cares about you. It's like, well, these entities might, might not care about them. You might not believe in them, but they believe in you, and they care about, and then that kind of bleeds into the whole spiritual warfare idea, which is, which is there, which DeYoung is big on, but it's really much, I don't think he gets into as much here, but it sets up all that framework of how we're driving without the headlights on in so many different ways of the world, and the world as it is I think would be their contention.
Yeah. And then when he starts getting into the discussion of evil, it's interesting because the periods of man, there was a period where Satan did have dominion over the world, but that is no longer the case. And now the only thing that Satan has dominion over is the realm of death.
Right.
And that was one of those moments. So therefore, Satan cannot be creative.
Right.
He can only be destructive.
The right. Who said that? Like, the only generativity that Satan has is death. And then there is a generativity in death, and the idea of that you can take something down to, but you can only, there's, it's fun to watch a building burn kind of thing, but that's it. Like, that's the only,
Right.
Which you're right. Like, that's huge. That's huge.
It's totally huge. And it makes you, it's one of those points in the book where you're suddenly like, especially if you're kind of, I don't know if you're traditional or if you're into conspiracy theory or any of these different avenues, or you're just sort of appalled at contemporary culture, you see that so much of it is indeed the culture of death.
Right.
Whether this is entertainment or war economy or sadomasochism or
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Can we talk about giants yet? Because I want to talk about giants. So
no, we're going to talk about giants, people.
So I think it's one of the best things out of I mean, at least for me, they're reclaiming of the reality of giants, and that the importance of giants, that it's not just kind of this throwaway story in David and Goliath, but this how giants get created, this intersection between demons and humanity, and that they are really this intersection that happens that gives birth to a fleshly being that then can operate in the world and do things and create can create principalities that we then fall into. Again, that imitating idea of Yahweh, like I can't set up, I don't have the power I can't make my own dirt, but I can move this dirt around and I can create this. And it's so compelling about how every culture has this ritual of how you create giants. Every culture has it, not, from there, there's from Asia, from Mesoamerica to, the idea that this spread somewhere outside, like, they came up with it somewhere and then it leaked out around the world is just, it's nearly impossible, as pervasive as, this ritual is, and all of that, and how that's really continues to be what we're boxing with today. We're continue to be boxing with these principalities that have been set up by these, by these entities, by these things, that.
Maybe we should break down what the actual narrative is in the book, and coming out of Genesis.
Okay.
Just for the sake of the audience.
So you've got. So you've got the, let me just, so in the ancient world, are you talking about like how you make a giant?
I'm just talking about what the giants in the Bible. What's this story?
Oh, the story of the Nephilim?
Yeah. So how did the Nephilim come about? The sons of men.
Right. So
had union with.
So it's here in page 90. So in recent times, the rediscovery of the original ancient text, Genesis 6:1-4, has led to fascination with the subject of the Nephilim, who were born of sexual immorality involving angelic beings and human women. In some quarters, this has developed into full-fledged conspiracy theories and regarding these Nephilim still existing in the world today. And they don't go that far, but they do. But they, and so that's really the nugget of it, is that you have essentially either the third of the angels that are cast out, that are in rebellion to God, find their way to this ritual, or give to humanity this ritual that allows them to take on kind of a human form, but that human form really ends up being in the form of a giant. So it's not really a human form. It's this aberration, this kind of, but it allows them to become the series of God kings that you find throughout the Old Testament. You find, the one that's well documented there. They talk about the bed of Og, and how the bed of Og is the place that these rituals happen, and that they are, that it is really a bed built for a 15-foot person. So that there's this way, and that's which, and they're not wrong in, saying, like, he kind of alludes to how kind of crazy the whole Nephilim thing is, from the ancient aliens to all that, but to kind of, and he does a great job, I think, of reeling it all back in and saying, look, this is the significance of it in the biblical story. Like, this is the significance of it, because they really do become the ones that set up the different principalities, the different ways of being. If you think about principalities, like these ways of being that will lead us to demonic places, that'll lead us to death, that lead us to destruction, that take us to hell, that take us to these places, that they're the ones that kind of laid down the tracks for this, that we're they're the ones that blazed the path for humanity to fall into. And so, when we talk about a Molech, or we talk about a Baal worshiper, we talk about Og, we talk the and they go so far as to say that that's what Christ was encountering, and the early Christians were encountering, when they came into the ancient world and went to Rome and saw that they were encountering these beings, or when the ancients went to Egypt, they were encountering these giant kings who.
Oh yeah, and Israel herself, when she came to her land, they had to contend with these beings. Right,
and that there's the direct idea out of the land of giant. They looked into the world and it was full of giants, and it's and it's so funny in my like just thinking about my education, about studying that, and how that got I mean, we would metaphorize, we would, spiritualize, we would anything but to contend with the fact that, oh, maybe the text actually says what it means. Maybe there were really big people and they were scared of really big people who were out there with cults of violence and cults of death. And it's like, well, let's not go there. Like, that looks bad.
Well, even if you do want to just, let the mythologizing tendency have its way, it is kind of wild that you see this with the Cyclops. And
right.
you see this amongst Native Americans and the
Yep.
Iroquois. There was this giant demon who was savaging the people, and we had this, the whole Hiawatha story, I think.
Right, precisely. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. As are the Mesoamerican stories of Quetzalcoatl and all that, like the one, these giants that come to Earth that demand human sacrifice, that they're not, and all the ways that, they talk about, and I really liked one of the comments that was about how some of this can be seen, some of the mythology that we have, that we understand, whether it's Greek mythology or that, is kind of pro devil rhetoric. Like there's all this kind of pro, like, you've got the Promethean story, and Prometheus goes out and captures fire, and isn't that great? But what happens with the fire? Like, it burns it, like it destroys the world. Like, it's, so it's like, every time humanity, and you think about all the, I thought it was
Prometheus, who was a Titan too, by the way.
Right, exactly, right. Who was already in the panoply of special people, and that's, so you're right. The Titan who, is already in that, and it's like, oh, we're going to give you the key, but we're going to give you the keys to the car, and you're 4 years old. Good luck, that there's this way of setting humanity up for failure in this, and yet it's this, there's this very liberating kind of idea about it, of like, oh, we're going to give you this freedom, but it's going to destroy you. And which is this, if you look at like the Greek myths, like that's the constant churn in the Greek myth. It's like, we're going to give you this thing, and it's going to just, this thing that you want, and it's going to destroy you. It's like, well, if that isn't pretty diabolical, I don't know what is, and that's, but you see that, and so their claim is that these really were the Anunnaki. These really were the Nephilim that had come down and kind of were a part of the, were creating havoc for humanity, because they were trying to carve out their own little fiefdom in imitation to Yahweh.
Unlike Yahweh, they need.
Right, exactly. They have to have it. Yep.
They need to feast upon human spirit, soul, body in order to thrive. Now, even though DeYoung warned us or pushed it away, when you get down into some of the more interesting, to me, more plausible conspiracy theory around things like Scientology or MK Ultra.
Totally.
Yeah, that they are about, that the famous ritual of out in the desert with L. Ron Hubbard. The only people there were humans, but they were trying to incarnate a demon.
Right.
So they were trying to bring otherworldly power into the human form.
Right.
And granted, there is all this archaeological stuff about giant people, but I do think your point about there being these sort of rituals people engage in order to acquire power, and in effect unwittingly trade themselves off,
and not to turn, again, I shudder to say this, but not to turn political, but go back now and watch the film of Obama's inauguration, because of not to say he's a demon. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, there was such power around that, and there was such energy around that, and to see what was going on. I'm, again, don't hear what I'm not saying, but you watch what was being manifested in that, watch what was being invited in that. And you see these movements like these things are alive. And there's something else at work in that, that it wasn't just this, human endorphin moment where we all bonded together because all of our chemicals started to hit at the same time. There was clearly a third body at work in that energy that was present there. And that's, I don't hear what I'm not saying, but just, it's the one I can think of in our most modern sense that really typified that,
or a Nazi rally.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yep.
It's interesting because there's some psychologist, Belgian, I think, who's been writing about totalitarianism, which, that language is very gigantic. And he says the three factors that really make people prime for it. One is what he calls free-floating anxiety. Two is a lack of connection with other humans. And three is a crisis of meaning. And, that doesn't speak to today.
Right.
So that's another way this book really speaks. It's like,
right. And if you wanted to,
low-hanging fruit for giants.
Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly. For that's fertile soil for any principality to stick its flag right in the middle of it and say, hey, take all that anxiety and turn it into love from me. Like, take all that, all that
and
misdirection and go in this direction with me. Yeah. Like, all of that is, and that's, and the thing is like, whether you look at the biblical text or you look at whatever, that's never Yahweh. Like that's never does Yahweh never does that. Yahweh is the God who, Elijah goes in and says, okay, you guys, make your fires come, and they can't make anything turn fire. And then Yahweh shows up and they take his little bunch of sticks and they pour water all over it, and it still burns into flame. Yahweh is the one that is so powerful. When he shows up, all that anxiety goes away. When he's that one that's so powerful, and it's what we see in the ministry of Jesus. Jesus shows up, and it's like, oh, okay, thank goodness. The blind are healed, the blind can see, the sick are healed, my anxiety is quelled. There's this wholeness, in that biblical perfect sense of everything's okay. We're all okay together, and that's. And that you see that again and again in Yahweh's miracles. It's the opposite of the co-opting of the pagan gods.
And so it's a spirituality that is about God making it, showing us, supporting the means and showing us how to be in the presence of God.
Right. How to approach the holy safely, and with our full selves, and with the without destruction. How to encounter the divine in a way that we are glorified. We become, one of the chapters, we become sons of glory. That's Yahweh's move. That's the divine's move, is that, and that the holy is a dangerous thing to approach, which I really appreciated out of this, that I think you see that with people that encounter the holy, and it rocks their world. And without a tradition or a formation or a container, it can be hard to contend with. I mean,
Yeah, you don't know how to work with it, and it can quickly be usurped. I think we've lived through that. I have. So in a Protestant sense, we're still retaining this strong sense of God's initiative, that none of this is going to happen without the divine making the first move towards us.
right.
But in a kind of less than not particularly Protestant way, it's also saying, and if your response to that requires something of you,
Right.
which I really, really, really dug.
Yeah. And it's very much kindred to my Swedenborgian background. I mean, that's, Swedenborg lays out that, this idea that there's God's part and there's our part, and that the reality, if we look behind the scenes, and this is why I can still call myself a Protestant, is that our part is really an illusion of our own agency, that God kind of gives us this, what Swedenborg says is this idea, we act as if we have a self, as if we are separate from the divine, as if we're not a part of creation. But it's what allows us to come into relationship with God, is the fact that we do operate under this very convincing illusion. But that is all mediated and cared for and groomed by God, if we let God, that kind of thing of, if we let ourselves be guided, if we let ourselves be disciplined, if we let ourselves be held. And that's part of the power of the disciplines. I mean, it's the Protestants are a little disingenuous in the sense of, they'll say like, oh, it's all grace, but you should come to church. Like,
right.
Oh, it's all grace, but you should pray. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you should, it's
Right.
all grace, but no, you should probably, think about who you have sex with. It probably matters, like that, it's this very, so it's not always, and then they do these, they've done this traditionally, they do this kind of, I think I'm almost mental gymnastics of, well, we don't keep we keep the moral law, but we don't keep the spiritual law. And they make all these divisions. And, I think it's, it's kind of backing into this stuff that, this hangover from Luther and from Calvin, I think, who all had their functions in their day. Like, I don't want to beat on them too badly in terms of what they were up to. Although, these guys certainly, De Young certainly will. But I think they had their function in their day. But I think as we come particularly to this age, which I really appreciate De Young's effort here, in the sense of trying to re-mythologize, reimagine, reconnect ourselves with the world of spirit and all that means in its lived experience every day. That they those guys who were just trying to negotiate a Roman world that was kind of wildly corrupt, couldn't capture. So
no, there's definitely things thrown out with the baby, no doubt about, or the baby was thrown out. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's this other thing where, I think a critique I've often read about Orthodoxy was that it was, in some sense, too Greek.
Right.
And I think that's been historically, a Protestant critique of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And yet this book is such a corrective to that I'm almost feeling like it needs more Greek.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I think that, I think he doesn't talk about it, but I mean, there's so much of the Platonic worldview that is kind of the background of this whole thing, that he's certainly, I mean, he doesn't even, I don't think he needs to talk about it because it is there, but yeah, I mean, I think you're right. But I also think that, and it's what I've said for a while, like, he's not Greek. He's OCA. He's Orthodox Church of America, which is this, they've been more linked to the Russians because the Russians were first coming to America in some ways, but they are like, if they can get their, I've often said, if they could get their act together, they would really be a powerful force in the United States because because of the way that the Greek Orthodox Church is so tied to the Greek and the Russian Orthodox Church is so tied to the Russians. They're beginning to find their voice, I think. And I think we are seeing in some ways, I'm Protestant. I see everything as everything is, Reformation to one degree or another. But I do see the OCA kind of arrival as this really speaking to, America in the 21st century, whether, and you look at the Death to the World guys out on the West Coast and they certainly, it's not that they don't draw from the Orthodox, from their folks around them, but so I think there's a freedom in here about like being a little unplugged from the Greek and being a little unplugged from the Russian and being a little, able to be American in a way that they can have this conversation. And it's one of the things I found, I find it really compelling because it's not, I don't have to, learn Greek declensions for, the Psalms or something. So there's.
Yeah, no, that's right. And then, well, then I was thinking about people like you and me too in relation to this book. So, you have your interest in Swedenborg, and I have my interest in anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner, and yet we're both cradle Protestant. The Protestant things I identify in myself that's almost like culturally Protestant, can't get past it really, is this keeping my own counsel, my own relationship with God having a primacy. And of course, if you go too far down that road, you really start jettisoning tradition.
Sure.
But by the same token, the thing I dislike about the Protestant is that it really kind of shoes the reality of demons and angels and spiritual beings and the veracity of visions and dreams and all this sort of stuff. And I think that's part of the reason why I am drawn to anthroposophy or Jung and probably you with Swedenborg.
Absolutely right. But the interesting thing too, though, is, and I've thought about this a bunch, is that the newest true incarnation of a Protestant movement that has made any headway at all is, the Pentecostal movement, which started in 1906. So it's just 100 years old, 110 years old or so, but is on wildfire, both, here and all over the world. And boy, if there was going to be a corrective to the over rationalization of the Protestant movement, that would be it. Like, I mean, that would be it. And it's so, I'm struck by, and I like, who am I to say like, oh, this is a legitimate, this is a legitimate expression, or this isn't a legitimate expression or something like that. It's, I think, we all got to drive the car we want to drive in this thing, but I do feel like, they've brought onto the scene a part of this conversation, front row center, angels and demons, spiritual warfare. I mean, that's their language. That's what they talk about all the time. So I have colleagues up the street, here that, that I like, and that we do ministry events together, and that's their word. That is they're steeped in that Pentecostal idea. So, I don't think the Lord, maybe we've given up on us, but the Lord hasn't given up on us, kind of thing, that there's still these ways of where, but, for me, what makes me really the kind of hold on to my Protestantism, and I don't just want to go, run off and grow a beard and, throw, wave a censer around, is that there, the two things of, one from Congregationalism and Robinson, who says, who, when he sends the pilgrims off to the new world, and he can't go with them, he's too old, but he gives them one final sermon. And in his final sermon, he says, I am convinced there is yet more light to be revealed from the word of God. And that notion that every generation we're looking to the new light that is being revealed in the word of God, and that we're not, we're not looking backwards, but not to say we're uninformed by the past, but we're looking for this revelation that's coming to us each generation. And second, it's just this constant like idea that I keep before me. It's like when somebody makes a truth claim, to say, by what authority do you say that? Do you do it because you have a tall hat, or because you have a long beard? By what authority are you making that truth claim? And I have no, like, some of my favorite reading is some of the Orthodox saints and stuff like that, and some of the patristic fathers and all those guys. But I'm never gonna let go of that lens of like, how is it that you like, by what's your street cred to be able to make those truth claims? And not just because you have a tall hat or a funny stick, like by what authority is this coming to me? And so that's really why I hold on to my, and I will continue to hold on to my Protestantism. But it's, what's funny is this book has made us have that conversation. You know what I mean? Like, I think, it came up and we didn't plan talking about this, but it makes like, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? Or why am I holding on to what I'm holding on to? Which is always a great sign when you crash into something that's true. That always has to happen when you crash into some logos. And, I'm really indebted to Young for his work in it.
Well, I'm kind of on the other side of the fence where I'm asking myself, why aren't I growing
Right.
the beard?
Yeah, right. Which is a great question too. Like, it's not, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing of it is that's by whose authority? And, the tradition will step into the void and try to answer that, both in Catholicism and the Orthodox, and to a lesser degree even the Anglican tradition. But when I'm mucking around in my world of recovery, that individualism is gone to such an extreme that it's almost like anyone can make a claim to something.
Yeah.
And you can also see what happens when there's no explicit or shared criteria of having to judge the claim.
Absolutely.
Now, of course, we can get all intellectual and say you'll know them by their fruits and all that. And that may be true, but it's not stopping so many people from making claims that are probably not true and getting, they're giants. Yes, they're trying to be. They're getting wealth and power off of that.
Right.
Those claims.
Yeah.
So there's something about what it really, I can't even believe this is coming out of my mouth, because this, a few years ago it never would. There's something about kind of how one stands in relationship to the tradition, at least the way De Young is presenting it. There's almost an inevitable humility that comes with that.
Yeah.
That really speaks to me.
Yeah. It's it's that whole definition of understanding. If we really want to step into understanding, we have to stand under. We have to submit ourselves to it. We have to stand underneath the thing and gaze up at it. And I do believe, I think what you're saying is so spot on, that, if you were to step into the Orthodox tradition and keep the tradition, that if you submit yourself to the tradition and look up at it, it will it will absolutely take you home. I also think that of the congregational way, but I do think that but in modernity, the power of and the forthrightness of the tradition of the Orthodox is probably, I won't say it's more the tonic we need or whatever, but it is so, I think it's so powerfully speaking to what we need, because we, the institutions are so, that have gotten so degraded, that truth is so subterfuge. There's so much subterfuge. There is so much like head scratching about, well, by what authority? How do I figure that out?
Right.
That there is that there's a real legitimate to the way of walking out the tradition and
or there's just a contempt for any discussion or narrative that uses truth with a capital T.
Right.
I mean, so it's almost
right.
like you can't even get purchased to have a conversation.
Right. Yeah, right, exactly. And yeah, and I mean,
so it's really interesting that, in this dystopia we're in, the societal breakdown, there is something very platonic in that sense that shows up.
Right.
Right. Like, okay, this is the consequences of jettisoning the idea of truth entirely. Maybe we should go back to this other conversation.
Right.
At least in the web world, or in my little corner of it, I am seeing what looks to be an interest in these things beginning to swell. Now, it may not always, it's not necessarily Orthodoxy, but it may be Christianity or the Western tradition generally, or I'm especially seeing it with anthroposophy. So who knows? Maybe
right.
maybe our conversation is more timely than we think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just struck with, like the orthopraxy of the Orthodox or of anything, just how do we do it? Like the doing of it. Whether it's, recovery, like, what do I do? Well, might start by going to some meetings, might start by entering, submitting myself to a recovery program. It might start by, and the same, I'm interested in the congregational church. Well, come to church, come worship and, be a part of the worship life. And then maybe get, come to a study, do some mission work, learn more about the disciplines, the traditional disciplines, or, that just the way that the way that these things are done are, and then the Orthodox is probably the greatest way, what I mean, in terms of like they are the like you swing the censer 3 times, not 4, not 2, 3, all like they're so, they have such a strong way that in a world when all the ways are kind of like leaking out of the bottom of the container of society, there's this way that they stand, I think, particularly particularly well in that. And I think that because it's been interesting, with me trying to foster those conversations of, like, well, here are some of the disciplines and here are some of the things we can do. And here's some of the things you can do to deepen your spirituality. Here's some of the things you can do to deepen your connection to God and all this. And, and they come right out of the early, the early Puritans or earlier, and they're, and so, and how there's this kind of lukewarm kind of thing about that.
Well, that's right.
Like there's this
warmness.
Yeah.
So in Greek, there was a term that you don't see much, but it was associated, I believe, with the sophists, called philodoxia. It wasn't a good thing. It meant love of opinion.
Yes.
And it was contrasted with philosophy, which was love of wisdom.
Right.
And how love of wisdom became love of opinion, had to do with a couple things, but one was one's relationship to the idea of truth, aletheia, something that's disclosed and revealed. And the sophist, Gorgias or somebody said, he was a total postmodern English professor. He said, man is the measure of all things. So he is saying there is no truth, and
Yeah.
really your truth and my truth. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
Philodoxy. But really, I think the question becomes, in a way, in order for it to stay love of truth, then the symbolic has to keep carrying the sense of truth in a way
Right.
that how it lands in you.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just
Absolutely.
and that's probably a conversation for another time. But I think that one way the Orthodox answer that is it has to do with the heart.
Right.
What is the heart's relation to the symbolic?
Yep. Right. And it's, we can't, that I think it was Iliad that says the best things we can't talk about, the second best things we talk about and we get wrong. So whenever we open our mouth, we're already talking about the third best things. And that the Orthodox answer to that is that they're about, some things are so true that you just live them out, like that you have to embody them. I mean, again, and this is good young, like you have to incarnate them. You have to, like you want to know what fatherhood looks like. You want to know what motherhood looks like. You become one, and
Right.
try and be one as best you can. And that is a truth that you can't really even talk about, that is so far beyond.
It's a mystery.
It is right. And it is right. It's truly, and it's deep and it's wide. And that's just one of our many human experiences. And so, and it is one of the things I really love about the Orthodox is this idea of that to really live out, to really, this their high emphasis on the incarnational into the body, that it's about that you have to live it out. That if you really want to know what's true, you have to live it out and you have to walk it out. And you have to, if you want to know what spaghetti and marinara sauce tastes like, you got to eat spaghetti with marinara sauce. You can't read about it. You can't contemplate it. You can do all those things. You can study the recipe books, but the experience of the thing is the and the embodying of the thing. And then that's true all the way up to the highest. You want to know what it is to be close to God. Well, start out, walk in that way, walk in the way of Christ, right. Walk in that, try and walk that out
too. That fully immanent has not exhausted the transcendent, because you are embodying it, but you are embodying life in the mystery.
Right.
That there is still something that is, you can be in relationship to the beyond, even as you are here. So the numinosity of the symbols lives because of the sense of mystery is cultivated and remembered, and we never have gotten to the end of something.
Yes.
Never figured it out.
That's so good. That it reminds me of the guy who wrote Less Than Zero. He would be, I think he's the guy who became a big cocaine dealer in Weymouth, Mass. I think it was they made a movie about it, but he wrote, I heard an interview with him, and he becomes this big cocaine dealer, falls into addiction himself, world blows up, kind of blah, 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 normal story. And he writes this memoir about it called Less Than Zero. And he gives this interview and he says, and I says, this was decades later. So it's what do you think that was all about? Or something like that. The interviewer says, he says, when I was doing drugs, I was in search of the transcendent. I was in search of something that was like bigger and weirder and more than the weirdness of life that I was in search of, this liminal place or something, and now I'm obviously butchering the quote, but he says, And now I stand at the bus stop and I pick up my girls as they're getting off the bus. And I think this is the weirdest, most bizarre, most that it's so mind-blowing, so more transcendent than anything I ever experienced when I was doing drugs. It was there was no drug that got me to a place that when I could stand and see, here are these two little creatures getting off the bus that are excited to see me, and how bizarre that is. And that, that they want to tell me all about their day, and that, like, just that experience that he was having in that moment and being aware of it, that, it couldn't, he expressed that how none of that could touch what it was like when he was, and that's what he was in search of when he was doing drugs, and I was, and I think what you said was just that's it. Like, that's it, that there's this transcendence that we're living into. And if we can just if we can give ourselves to it, it will reveal itself, and it's all mystery. Like, it is crowd. I've fought that my whole life. That mystery stuff, but I've really taken it to believe that it just means that you don't know where the bottom is. It just means that there's more. It doesn't mean that you don't understand what you're seeing. It means that you're swimming in the ocean and you can't see the bottom. I've had that experience diving, and it really is an unnerving experience to look down and look 200 feet deep when the light shines in, and you still can't see anything down there. And I think that when we talk about mystery, that's what we are talking about. We're talking about that nature of that. So that was really, thank you. That was good. I think, I think that's the heart of this book. I really do. I think
I do too.
Because that's what he's showing in this arc from the ancient to the modern, and everything in between is like, that you're on the top of an ocean that you're looking down into that has no bottom, that you can't see the bottom of.
Right. Yeah. The sad thing is the person who survives cocaine addiction, who does not feel the mystery of reading his kids at the bus stop.
Yeah, right.
So I guess it's my hope, and I'll say this for the sake of the audience. So Andy and I are going to be doing a series of conversations, probably mostly theological, maybe not entirely. But I think my hope is that we'll be able to mine this shaft quite a bit deeper, meaning the Orthodox.
Love it.
Yeah, I love it too. All right. Well, round 2 will be in December.
Cool. Excellent.
All
Good.
right.
Do something Christmassy.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Peace and grace.